Hello, art historians, and welcome to the first part of our lecture over Islamic art. So where this ties in is we're looking at post-classical times. So we're looking at like the Byzantine Empire that we already talked about is basically post-classical Rome. And they continued on in keeping some things alive from Greece and Rome, particularly from Rome Christianity and some of the architectural techniques. But we're going to see them kind of take things their own direction. So now we're moving into Islamic art, where Islam as a faith is going to develop in the Arabic world. And then as the Arabic world expands outward, taking their religion with them, we're going to see them interact and kind of adopt some of their artistic techniques from those surrounding them, including the Byzantine Empire. So when we talk about Islamic art, we're talking about art that was done in the lands where Islam was a dominant religion, or whose rulers were Islamic. So we're going to look at the Arabic world, so Saudi Arabia, and then eventually as the Islamic faith spreads out through trade and also through conquest, we're going to see other areas come under the umbrella of Islam, and we're going to see art develop in those areas as well. Now, when we talk about Christian art, we were pretty much talking about any art made in the Christian world was for Christianity. In the Islamic world, that is not going to necessarily be the case. There will be art that is secular or non-religious. Now, one thing I really want you guys to understand is that because the people who established Islam were Arabic and they were nomads, they didn't really have a strong artistic or architectural tradition of their own. So the way that the art looks in the Islamic world is going to really be based on where they are in the Islamic world and what it is that they adopt. So just some basic information on the background of the belief system. So we've been talking about belief systems that's going to really influence the art of this time period. Comes from in Saudi Arabia, which is where Islam will develop. And it was led under the Prophet Muhammad, who through the teachings of Islam helped to unite together all of these nomadic tribes of Arabia under a common belief. So the story goes that he'd actually married a wealthy widow. He was a Bedouin, and Bedouins are nomadic merchants who kind of travel around this area. And he was kind of disturbed in Mecca, which Mecca was this city ruled by a very particular tribe who made a great deal of money off of this area because people would stop through Mecca for trading and also as kind of a major religious site. So he was kind of disturbed by the fact that there was so much poverty in this area of great wealth, and he was in the midst of praying, he was visited by the angel Gabriel and was basically receiving the words that will become the Quran. Now, Muhammad is not a god, he is a prophet, and this religion or belief system comes strongly off a link to the Hebrew faith, which we will be talking about. So eventually what's going to happen as Muhammad becomes not only just a religious leader, but a political and military one as well, the faith that unites all of these people together into becoming an empire will tread with them. And so kind of an important marker for you is 610 CE. So this is when we're going to really start to see the Islamic faith really take hold and see the art spread with it. So just a couple things about the beliefs of Islam that are relevant to what we're going to be talking about. So they are monotheistic, the God being Allah, which in terms of considering whether it's a different God from Christianity or Judaism, they don't believe that it is. Like it's all basically the same God. Muhammad is the prophet. He's considered kind of almost a founder of the belief system, but not a god, and more of a prophet in teachings, because this idea of monotheism was not new. It had already developed in the Middle East. This wasn't a new thing for them. He just kind of establishes it as the primary idea in the Middle East. And the teachings of Muhammad were recorded in the Quran, which is recited in worship. And also, one of the driving forces behind this was a merchant area. So, one of the things that the Quran establishes is rules and guidelines for fair treatment of others and how to conduct yourself and ways so that the merchant world that they lived in could still run well. All right, so there's all kinds of backgrounds to this. They share a great deal of similarities with Christianity and Judaism. And they considered them what's called the people of the book because their religious beliefs were so similar and had a lot of the same key figures. So in terms of prophets, Islam has Abraham or Ibrahim is also a part of this. Moses and Jesus is considered a prophet as well. And Jerusalem was originally the holy city for the Islamic world. That's where they used to face to pray before they moved to Mecca instead, to make Mecca the site of where they face to pray every day. They do believe in heaven, hell, and judgment day. The religious backgrounds are, like I mentioned, incredibly similar to these. So there kind of is the story that Abraham had two sons. So his wife, I believe it was Sarah, was not actually supposed to be able to have children. So with her handmaiden, they had Ishmael, or so he had Ishmael. And then eventually Sarah gets pregnant and you have Isaac. And the story goes that Isaac and his descendants would become the Hebrew faith, where Ishmael and his descendants would be along the lines of the Islamic faith. So there are some very important parts of the Islamic faith that play into how the art and architecture is going to look. And these are called the 5 pillars of their worship, and pillars meaning like what holds up their beliefs. So one is the profession of faith. There is fasting during the month of Ramadan from sun up to sundown. It's supposed to be devoted to worship and community and helping others. And then, of course, there is charity, which is a huge part of this, giving to others. Then there is prayer 5 times a day and making a pilgrimage to Mecca, the holy city, once in their life, if possible. So let's start with Mecca, because Mecca is a very important city to this. So as I mentioned earlier, even before Muhammad was around, Mecca was a holy city. It was a very important place to this area. So Mecca was kind of a trading hub controlled by the Quraysh tribe, and they were able to make a great deal of money coming from people coming into this area to trade. But also in the middle of this area was this the Kaaba. All right, so the Kaaba was this very holy site that originally was very simple and basic, that would have been a place for people to come and put their polytheistic gods. And then no matter where they were in traveling, they could always face back towards Mecca and pray towards their gods. So Muhammad, when he's in Mecca and he's preaching these beliefs of just one God and charity, that obviously conflicts with what this tribe is doing, because the tribe is making a great deal of money off of taxing people coming into their city for pilgrimage to visit their idols and also to come in and trade. So this idea of giving away your money instead of spending it was a little bit of a problem. So Muhammad is forced to flee away from Mecca, going to Medina. And this is actually considered the Hijrah, is kind of the starting date of the Islamic calendar. So like we have the Christian calendar where you have the seasons of Advent and Lent and kind of this holy calendar based around the life of Jesus, where this is, considered a very important event in the start of the Islamic world and the establishing of the Ummah, or the Islamic community. Now, while he's there in Medina, he actually becomes kind of a spiritual leader with his teaching. So kind of like he, says the words of Allah, and that kind of becomes the rules and, lifestyle of the area. And there's some more specifics to that, but this is just a general overview. And because there were so many enemies trying to silence him and so many assassination attempts, he also becomes kind of a military leader, religious leader, and spiritual leader all in one. So eventually Muhammad and his followers, who are united together, not under any particular place. It's not like other empires we've talked about where they started out in Rome and then expanded out. Like, this is a unification of people who are very nomadic in nature. They unite together under this belief system. It's not really a geographic empire that builds them together. It's one of faith. And so they travel out and they go back to Mecca. And Muhammad goes into the Kaaba and he removes all of the idols that are there. And then he establishes that this is, he does a call to prayer. And this establishes that this is going to be the place that Muslims face during prayer. So this is the Kaaba, and the Kaaba has a very important significance, even pre-Islamic. So according to this, there was in the Kaaba a small black stone. And the small black stone was most likely a meteorite, but at that point, you can imagine that that's pretty sacred, that would date back all the way to Adam and Eve. And at one point, this was actually stolen by enemy tribes. You can imagine what like a major, thing that did. So this shrine was originally, even, before Islam came around, was a big deal. But now, with the arrival of Muhammad, it becomes the major site of Islam. And the goal of visiting Mecca is to be able to touch this large black stone. And you can see that around it, covered in gold writing. So there's a cloth that kind of drapes over it. And you can see that there's the Islamic calligraphy around it. And then it's actually raised up so that the doorway couldn't be flooded or anything get into it or damage it. And every little person that you see there, that's a person who is there to visit the Kaaba. And what you're supposed to do is circumambulate it. So remember, amble is to walk. So you're walking in a circle 7 times around the Kaaba with the hope of getting to touch it. And we'll talk about why 7 is such a significant number in Islam. And then at some points, you're supposed to collect stones, 7 stones, and throw them at these pillars that represent Satan. So it's kind of this idea of casting Satan away and embracing this. And people here wear white, men and women alike, and men and women are invited both into this. And it's kind of this idea of experiencing this together. It's a celebration of the living and the deceased and everyone all together in kind of this sense of community within the Islamic faith. So again, the term means cube in Arabic, so the Kaaba, all right, or so Arabic. And again, pre-Islamic shrine, believed to have been built by Abraham to hold that black stone that would have been in the time of Adam and Eve. Supposedly it was given to Abraham by the angel of Gabriel, okay, or angel Gabriel, who is sacred in Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. And that, you know, all of this ties back to the time of Adam and Eve. Again, most likely probably a meteorite that would have been very magical at this time coming from the heavens. It is covered in very precious cloth, so silk and cotton, and it's covered with an Arabic script. And it's considered to be like, you know, the most sacred site within the Islamic world. And it's kept within a sacred mosque. And a mosque is, you know, a place of worship in the Islamic world. It used to be covered in like the pagan sculptures, but that's what Muhammad removed as kind of this like, no, we're getting rid of these. This is going to be the place of Islam now. Meant to be circumambulated in a process called the tawaf. All right. So like it's that 7 times going around this. And apparently, from what I understand, because you're not supposed to get into Mecca unless you are Islamic, and people have like snuck in there, but you're really not supposed to. And so like if it's too crowded on the bottom, there are escalators that can take you to upper levels so that you can still circumambulate. And it's a very streamlined procession with no drama, no traffic. And when people come to Mecca, there are vendors out, like just giving food, giving drinks to people, supporting the pilgrims. To be there is kind of a way to, you know, expand on that sense of charity and giving. It has been rebuilt a couple times because during religious conflicts, it has actually been destroyed. And it's been rebuilt and redone to kind of maintain its, you know, sacred space. And a couple things about it. I mentioned that the door is above ground, just showing you the image, so that way it protects it from flooding. Before this was established, Muslims faced towards Jerusalem to pray, but now it's kind of this idea that they face towards Mecca instead. I mentioned that it was a Shiite group of Muslims, actually, which is more political than religious, come in and steal the black stone, which was, you know, a major disappointment, obviously. And when the Hajj, which is what this pilgrimage to Mecca is called, takes place, women are seen as spiritual equals. And they can come on this if they are accompanied by a male. And if over the age of 45, women can come with another female companion. And that's just a mode of protection. Let's see here. So you can see here people coming in Mecca to, pray and go as part of the Hajj. But you can also see around it that it's really got a lot of, influence from cultures that would be nearby. So you're talking about an area that at one point would have been very near to the empire of Alexander the Great, would have been very near to the Roman Empire. So we can see evidence of Roman and Greek architecture, classical Greek architecture, getting adopted to build this mosque because they didn't have an architectural tradition really of their own. So we can see that in the columns and the ambulatory aisles up to the side. Now, I've been really looking into the significance of the number 7. And apparently the number 7 was sacred even before the Islamic world or even the Judaic world developed. And that was because these belief systems developed in the Middle East, like by the early civilization. So like Samaria that we talked about. And they had this belief in the 7 planets that apparently they could see. So tracking the macrocosmic world and the 7 days of the week that went with that. So in the Islamic world, the belief of there being the 7 hells, 7 heavens, when they say that, so like the idea of the number 7, it basically means innumerable. So like heaven has no limits, hell has no limit. So kind of like it's this, there's no limit to the faith or limit to, the worship or giving that you can do. So that number 7 is very significant. And this is the Grand Mosque that you can see right here. And you can see the front of it has, the columns holding up the entrance. You can see the arches right there. You can see the domes. You can see the minarets on the top, which are the call to prayer, or the place to call the prayer, like we kind of talked about with the Byzantine Hagia Sophia. So you can see there, right there is the Kaaba, and all of these people there in this orderly fashion for this gathering of millions of people from around the world to come together in faith. Now, again, the Islamic world, because they were an nomadic culture, didn't really have their own artistic or architectural style. So therefore, they will, depending on where they expand to, adopt and adapt the art and architectural styles that they conquered or traded with. So we're going to see, as they move into the Byzantine Empire, the Persian world, as they move to the West, a mosque is a mosque. It will have the same features, but depending on where it is, it could look very different depending on the area they settle into. So things that we're going to see, one of the first places that the Islamic world expands to, as the Arabic world kind of expands out with their Islamic faith, is going to be to the Byzantine Empire and the Persian Empire, because those two places were so busy fighting with each other that they were tired when the Arabic forces came through. So in the Byzantine Empire, because the Byzantine Empire is post-classical to Rome and Greece, we're going to see the Islamic people who settle in that area adopt those architectural styles to build their own buildings. So take this building, for example. This is the Dome of the Rock, which is the 3rd most sacred site in the Islamic world. And looking right here, you can definitely see some Byzantine influence. If you look very closely, you can see the marble columns. You can see the barrel vaulted entranceway. You can see the blind arches, which is what, like a blind arch is like you can't see all the way through it, but it is an arch there. We, of course, have the dome on the top and that appearance of gold, which we see a great deal in the Byzantine Empire, and mosaic, like very elaborate mosaic on the outside, which is something else they would see in the Byzantine Empire. And you can see around it Arabic script. So that's definitely something that is theirs. And the Arabic language is so beautiful and the writing is so beautiful because it had to be, because that was the words. Like if you're using Arabic script, you're using it to write the Quran, and the Quran is the words of God, not Muhammad, God's words to Muhammad. So therefore it had to be beautiful and perfect as a way to represent the perfection of the God that said it. So as you can imagine, this is a very tempestuous site in the world because it is sacred to all three major Abrahamic faiths. So Christianity, Judaism, and the Islamic world. And it's where it is located is you're talking about the rock where the story goes that Abraham had actually gone to sacrifice his son Isaac, and then God spoke to him and said no, and basically Abraham had showed his devotion. And since Abraham is sacred to Christians in the Old Testament, and of course obviously the Jewish faith and then the Islamic faith, this is a site that is important to all of them. And today there's a lot of dispute over it, mainly coming down to the control of Jerusalem, which we won't get into because there's so many different points of view on who should have it between Palestine and Israel and who actually does control it. But regardless of all of that, this area called the Temple Mount, you have the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, which is obviously for Christianity. You have the rock, which is sacred to Jews. And then you also have in this area where the Wailing Wall, which was the Jewish Temple of Solomon, and the Wailing Wall is all that's left after the Romans basically came in and destroyed it. So on top of this, you have this dome built over this rock. And there generally has been a peace agreement that can get tempestuous at times, where the Jewish faith has access to the Wailing Wall and around the Temple Mount, but they are not allowed to come into or near the actual Dome of the Rock on top of it. So it's kind of like a mutual understanding between them that's a religious issue that gets muddied up by a great deal of politics that would much be better suited for a history class instead of an art history class. So for now, we're just going to examine the Dome of the Rock in terms of how it shows that as the Islamic world encountered the Byzantine Empire, they really did adopt a lot of that architecture as a way to celebrate their own religious beliefs, because the Hagia Sophia and Byzantine architecture was exemplary. Like, it's a really good example to go off of and build a very important building. So the inside where you have the rocks, this is Haram al-Sharif, which is the noble sanctuary. So there is the mosque that is part of this, and then there is the Dome of the Rock. And inside the dome is sitting over the rock, and it is meant to be circumambulated 7 times, just like we would see in Mecca as well. And it's meant to kind of bring that reflection of, Muhammad's ascendancy into heaven. And then you can see the remainder of the Temple of Solomon and the Wailing Wall that would be nearby. So just to give you guys kind of an idea of why this is such a hot issue, all right, you have the Wailing Wall, you have the tunnel to get into it, and then this area is where it's kind of, so the mosque and then the Dome of the Rock. And you can see that it's definitely kind of, there's a dividing line on where people can actually go. So if you look at it, it is an octagon, which is a shape that we have seen in San Vitale. It's not something unusual. And then the entrances to get up to the Dome of the Rock would have archways that had 7 arches on each side. So remember, it's that idea of the number 7. It is centrally designed, so it's basically centered around this rock with the dome over the top of it. Also something you would have seen in the Pantheon in Rome, and we can see that with the emphasis in the Byzantine world with the dome over the top. Now, if you look at this dome, you can see that around the base of it are that halo of windows like we would see in the Hagia Sophia, and that light from those windows would bring in the heavenly light and kind of reflect off of, illuminating, if you will, the words of the Quran and Muhammad that are around the inside. So you see there that it's got the ambulatory aisles for people to walk around and circumambulate the actual stone. But what you will not see is any figural images. So whereas Byzantine mosaics would have Jesus or saints or even some of the patrons like Justinian or Constantine, you do not see that, because the Islamic world, very similar to the Jewish world, did not believe in showing figural images of humans. Like, that was a no-no. You did not do that in religious buildings because that could be misconstrued with idol worship, and that was a no. So the idea of the gardens of paradise in heaven, and that heaven is divided up into these different gardens, and that, the growth is limitless and, unbounded. We see a lot of embracing of nature in Islamic artworks, and we see floral patterns and vegetation and repeating geometric symbols to kind of show that, you know, it's unlimited. Like there are no bounds to heaven or hell or paradise or this world. So if you look at the inside of it, you can see that that's the rock right there, the sacred rock of it, which is kind of kept off. And then you see the space for them to be able to circumambulate it. And all around it is calligraphy and mosaic. So you see these beautiful, if you look at the top part right here, this beautiful patterns of flowers and vegetation and these repeating patterns that never really seem to end. And then you've got around that a base of Arabic writing, which is passages from the Quran and telling about the history of the building. The writing is so beautiful that it basically is decorative itself, all right? And this is supposedly the oldest surviving written passages from the Quran, so that's pretty amazing as well. So it's very important to note that Islamic art in a religious capacity, and that's an important part of the story, is not supposed to show religious figures. You're not supposed to show figures because that could be construed as a idol, which is again why the Byzantines may have at one point, after getting beaten by the Islamic world, or they were trying to embrace their Islamic and Jewish neighbors, decided to ban icons for a time. But there is no figurative art. Occasionally we will see animals, but it's more common to see, if you look here on the corners of this arch, those vegetative patterns that are very expansive. They just kind of keep going and interweaving. So kind of this idea of limitless abound, all right, and kind of the gardens of paradise. And you can see the geometric patterns down here at the bottom. So calligraphy was an incredible skill to have. Oh, I just realized you can't see my face. An incredible skill that you would have in the Islamic world. Women could actually be calligraphers. But this was the highest level of talent that you could have, because you were basically writing the word of God, and it needed to be perfect and geometrically balanced. And everything is about that balance and peace and limitless heaven and opportunity. And they used it everywhere. And this is actually on the Dome of the Rock, zoomed in. You can see it right here, where the Arabic calligraphy is used to talk about the building and the passages from the Quran. The Islamic world, while Europe after Rome falls is in a dark age, the Islamic world won't have that. The Byzantine Empire didn't have it either, but the Islamic world definitely will not have a dark age. They did not see a conflict between religion and education. Those two things were not in conflict with each other. You could have faith, but also understand the world through the study of geometry, medicine, science, astronomy, all of those things. So therefore, they, from the Byzantine Empire, actually studied Greek and Roman texts from architects, philosophers, physicians, all of those things, and continued to grow in terms of their knowledge and their, ability to understand the environment and the world around them. They invented algebra, which is algebra, and trigonometry. They were able to use that knowledge to create these beautiful, geometrically perfect, just like God, perfect works of art with straight edges and just, perfection, which kind of reflects their idea of what Allah was. So when you look at this, you can see handwriting is jewelry fashioned by the hand from the pure gold of the intellect, which I think is just this beautiful quote, that it was decorative, it was beautiful, and meant to be perfect in as many ways as it possibly could be. So it was a very valued art form. So this is actually a folio from the Quran, which is on the 250. And this would actually, the gold medallions that are on this, if you guys look here, that shows that this is later in Islam, that you can kind of say, okay, they were very anti-wealth whenever, basically they were anti-royalty. Like that wasn't what Muhammad was all about. And that's not what his initial successors were all about. But as the Islamic world becomes more of an empire and being an emperor establishes kind of a certain status, we start to see that reflected. So this is actually, you can see here in the gold medallions or the gold leaf script that would be on it, that this is definitely when they're starting to get to be some wealth. And this is actually Kufic or Kufic calligraphy, and it's meant to be read from right to left. And this would probably it doesn't really look as Arabic It's more African based, which means like this is would have been like from Islam expanding to the West and it getting mixed in with more native scripts in the area. This is just another example of that. You can see this beautiful blue paper that it's on, which the Byzantine Empire, we saw the Vienna Genesis, which was in purple paper. So some things that you're going to see very commonly in Islamic art, since they don't show figures or people, is intellectual patterning and geometric patterns. Like, so for example, you would see they would always repeat out to the edge, and it's all about harmony and balance and, you know, the seven hells and seven heavens idea that it's just unmeasurable, you know, that it just keeps going. Like paradise has so many levels and, you know, so many different parts of it, plus the idea of the gardens of paradise. So you have here what's called arabesques, and these are patterns that are like vines or floral designs. They kind of form a geometric pattern, and then tessellation, which is geometric patterns that kind of create a continual repetition. For example, these are arabesques, and this would be examples of tessellation, which has that geometric perfection to it. So the next thing that we're going to look at, we're going to stop here, is we will move into looking at the architecture of the Islamic world, which was primarily focused on mosques. And we'll look at how their architecture is similar no matter what, because they are mosques, but how it's going to appear differently depending on where the mosque develops.